But you know, go.
What is going on, six-pack coverage fam? Welcome to the FN Sports Podcast, the show where teachers grade sports' biggest issues. My name is Parker Ainsworth, perhaps better known on Twitter and Instagram at Painsworth512, definitely better known as your favorite history teacher, and I run the show here at FN Sports. Assuming you're a YouTube regular and thus new to the FN Sports Podcast, we wanted to help catch you up on who we are. We decided to take a minute and throw it back. I am a history teacher after all. We wanted to give you a chance to enjoy some of our heavy hitters or our most listened to episodes from our audio platforms. You can find all these and more when you look up FN Sports on those audio platforms. That includes Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Google Podcasts, and more. So sit back, relax, and enjoy a history lesson while we play for you one of our greatest hits. This week's edition of FN Sports is a little bit different. We have a writer's workshop with New York Times best-selling author Mirin Fader. Mirin Fader works for TheRinger.com currently. She's worked for Bleacher Report and others in the past. You can find all of her work at MirinFader.com. Some of her latest stuff will be also posted obviously on TheRinger.com. But she joins us today to talk about her New York Times best-selling Giannis, The Improbable Rise of an NBA MVP, in which she chronicles the life of Giannis leading up to his choice to re-sign with the Bucks last December. The book did come out within weeks of Milwaukee Bucks and Giannis winning the NBA championship and his first finals MVP. Talk about some serendipity and great timing. We'll talk to her about that as well. But instead of listening to me go on and on about Mirin's writing, let's hear it from her. All right, we are joined on FN Sports by New York Times best-selling author Mirin Fader. How are we doing, Mirin?
I'm good. I'm not over this intro. Still in shock, but I'm good. How are you? It's good to be here.
I'm good. Are you really in shock? You knew it was really good when you finished it, right?
No, I never finish things and I'm like, wow, that was good. I don't think that at all. I'm totally in shock. In fact, we knew when the list was coming out, like the exact time that they posted, and I was already preparing to be disappointed and what I'm gonna, I was going over what to tell my friends and family who, were checking my Amazon rankings because I didn't want to get involved. And I was like, you do it, Dad. It's fine. I don't want to look at it. And I was just so shocked. So shocked. I'm so shocked.
For those of you that are out of the loop a little bit, Mirin just finished and is on a whirlwinds tour because of the timing of it all. Giannis, The Improbable Rise of an NBA MVP. First question for the New York Times bestseller, Mirin. Can you eat a 50-piece chicken McNugget or a 50-piece chicken mini and a Sprite with lemonade? Can you eat one of those?
Yes. And, every time I pass Chick-fil-A, I'm like, today would be a good day to get some chicken because of Giannis.
They just call it the Giannis. You walk up, I need one of those.
I would like to be honest. Do that. No. I'm gonna do that. They're gonna look at me like, "Who are you? This is too much."
Clearly it's a common order because, or at least for one guy.
Trendsetter.
Mirin, I gotta ask, as someone who's enjoyed reading you for a while now, I know that you're a coffee shop writer.
Oh, yes.
This book gets okayed in December. It was December of 19 or January of 20. I remember the tweet storm of sorts when this was coming around.
Yeah.
And then like 3 months later, the whole world shuts down. That's no coffee shops. I got to ask a couple questions about the process of this and the doing of making a book. So obviously big changes happen, right? Zoom and so on. What changes did you enjoy? Was there any change in the, pandemic writing that you enjoyed?
This was the first time where I got to be home. Before when I was working at Bleacher Report, I was on a plane like every other week, and I really missed home. I missed seeing my parents' dog. I missed going over there for dinner. I missed like things in my friends' lives. And, I actually enjoyed just being in one place. And I got a coffee subscription because I couldn't go to the coffee shops. Shout out to Bixby. Sponsor me. They're my favorite. They're my favorite indie coffee shop. And well, they're not a physical shop, but they're an online store and I love them. And, it was just really good for me to have a reset. Obviously, this was a painful time period. I never wanted to have this at all. And it made my job so hard. But yeah, there was joy in just like getting to stop for a second.
Right. Like, I think everyone realized how much life can be better when we slow down over the course of this. It didn't necessarily slow down for you. You just didn't move as much, right?
Actually, it got way harder and more busier. Actually, nothing slowed down. And then I changed jobs. But at least being in one spot, I felt myself at least a little more grounded, both feet on the ground. But yeah, things got insanely busy. As you know, I had 1 year to do the book instead of 2 years, which is what normal authors are given.
Yeah, and there was this serendipitous timing we'll talk about at the end. I think I've heard that word 1,000 times surrounding this book, but we'll talk about that closer to the end. Were there any interviews that you think went better? You did 221 interviews at the famous number passed around. Was any of these that went better because of Zoom? Ones that you wish you could have done not on Zoom? Obviously, everyone wants to go see Grease, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think there was a tolerance from both ends of like understanding of how hard this is. And maybe that made the interviews better because we were both, vulnerable and how are you and how's your family? And it got, you got to that intimate connection a little earlier in the interview than maybe if it was in normal times. And so even though it was over Zoom, I found that people were willing to, I don't know, connect more and be a little bit more compassionate and understanding because of this like global humbling that we've all been through. Of course, recreating a city, Athens, where I'm not in Athens, I'm in Los Angeles in my apartment with my subscription coffee is quite different. But I think it really forced me to be, more relentless in trying to get details. Okay, I'm not there. Can you describe the street? What did the cafe look like? What's around it? It just like really forced you to ask even more questions than you ordinarily would, because it's like, the publisher wasn't like, oh, Mirin, like it's a pandemic. Like, I understand this is going to be rough. Like, you can have more time. It's like, no. All right, writer's right. It's a pandemic. It's still due March 1st, 2021. Figure it out,
Well, and that's weirdly like, because you write with your senses very well, right? And so it's like when you lose one sense, you have to grow the other four really well, like, just have to develop them in a weird way.
Exactly. And just being, accepting of your limitations, but also just trying like hell to make up for them. I didn't want to make an excuse. I was really worried that it wouldn't be a good product because of all of these things. But then I had to like really battle with myself this whole pandemic of just like, okay, let's not think about that. Let's just pour your energy into doing a good job and reporting the heck out of this. Don't think about what if it's not. There was a lot of what ifs. One of my friends in the industry was like, I'm going to block you if you say what if one more time. Like, what if this isn't good? What if I don't get this? What if? And he's like, if you say what if one more time, we're done. And he did a screenshot of like blocking my content.
That's really funny, actually. That's really, because like that's like the time you need someone to talk to. Is like, listen, this happened.
He's like, if you don't stop, like you are getting blocked. It was serious.
And you didn't stop. You kept asking. Just didn't stop. Maybe not as much with him, but you didn't stop asking what if. You deep dive a lot of different like avenues and things like that. I gotta ask you. So when I think, and this is probably because I'm a teacher, when I think of biography of athletes, that's frequently like kids' books, right? Like, and I don't mean that pejoratively. Frankly, I could never write any of these, right? Much in a kid's book, I think the language choice had to be much more delicate. This is not a kid's book. This is very real,
right?
And it's a whole different set of challenges. That was obviously an intentional move, right? So, what was the thought there?
Yeah, like I think Giannis's story is so inspirational that I do think there's a tendency to like sanitize it a bit and make it palatable and, really be on the fuzzy lightheartedness. And there's totally those elements too, but there's also like very serious, darker elements like racism and immigration and globalism. And all of those things are very true and accurate. And so I think for me, it was like, I wanted to write a book that did justice to his story, and not just his story, but the political, social, economic context that he lives in and lived in. And It's interesting because I want kids to be familiar with this side of the story too, because they're growing up in this world as well and need to be aware of the political context. And surely they are, as we are all thinking about identity in numerous ways nowadays. And it's interesting, like when I was a kid and I, was looking up to people in the NBA and WNBA, I always wanted to know, like, how did they get here? It's really simple. As a kid, you want to know, like, how did they do it? Like, where did they come from? It's like very simple. And I think if you think like a child and you write like with the curiosity of a child, it really, sports biographies distill to those two questions.
Yeah, and it's funny because you talk about like where did they come from? We know the folklore of like, Jordan, and he gets cut as a sophomore or whatever, and then and we know a lot about a lot of these American folks.
Right.
Giannis' story, there was this big gap in the middle that you've now filled in for all of us, right? It's obviously a fascinating story. I don't mean that it should have been a kid's book by any stretch. It's just it's very real. Like there are some things that like I teach in the middle school, so like some middle school kids maybe, but like you don't want a little kid knowing about like the swastikas everywhere. Like that's a real life thing.
Right.
We talked about census earlier. And diving into the contents of the book, there was a lot about food. I just noted like there was souvlaki in Greece, and there was Nigerian cuisines mentioned. There was obviously like the epilogue will have Chick-fil-A in it. There's all the smoothie talk. I also think there's part of this like there was an absence of food too. Like that was also important. Was that intentional, or am I making a lot out of nothing?
No, you're intentional, and I'm so happy that you picked up on this, because that was a major motif in the book. There's a couple motifs. Shoes is one of them, and food is one of them. And there is one chapter called Hunger, and I wanted to put that first because it's a metaphor for the entire book. There's the literal hunger with the food, and then there's the hunger and desire to be something and somebody. And so I set up food as this motif to kind of show those double layers of meaning. And with Giannis, like somebody who grows up knowing acutely how much food they have or don't have is going to be affected by that for the rest of their lives. And I think sometimes when people, read narratives about people that come from really difficult backgrounds, they tend to think that once their circumstances change and they get money, that they no longer have those issues. And so it was important for the book to have food as a repeating motif, because it's not like your circumstances change and you don't have those same insecurities. In some way, you will always think like you're food insecure, even though you have. There's an anecdote in the book about Oreos, and I think that's the most searing anecdote in the book, because it just really represents like how his mentality was shaped by this hunger for so many years.
Yeah, I'm not ever taking anyone's Oreos or gummy bears or things that I think of like, ever again. That was a fascinating anecdote, and I don't want to give too much away, but read the book. It's really good. I also, that was interesting that like, I think it was Thanasis, one of the brothers sits down with someone and they're like, and he's like, I can just eat all of this, and starts like double breading his own souvlaki or whatever. It's like, once it's there, it's like, I have to take in everything.
Exactly. Or take some to go, and Giannis and his Rubbermaid boxes, and never knowing if you're going to have more. And yeah, it's such a thing. It's such a thing. I've been hearing a lot of, people who have read the book that are just like, wow, I went through this myself. Me and my family are fine now. We're middle class, but growing up, I really didn't have much. And I always am acutely aware of these things. And that's very real. You kind of don't lose that instinct. So I'm glad that that's in there, because I think that's realistic. You don't really lose that, even though you have more money.
Completely. One other thing that's realistic about the book that I think is like a very hard truth of Giannis's life is he's constantly running, his family, people like them in Greece are running into racism and then running into immigration things. And this entire, like, this struggle of just existing in these spaces, Sepolia, Milwaukee, wherever. Obviously, we know it's tough to come to the United States at 18, but did you know about all of that background when you jumped into this book, or was that a surprise? Do you have some hints, or was that really new?
Yeah, it was really, really new. I mean, I had a hunch for sure that he experienced racism just because, like, it's so common, not just in America, obviously, but in Europe, of course, like that have heavy, immigrant populations, like it's going to happen. And so my thing was like, how come we haven't heard much about this? And I think the entire childhood period just hasn't really been covered, and let alone the racism. And I do think because his story is so awesome and inspiring, people gloss over that, or it's just not told for whatever reason. But it was just really important to have that in there because Giannis doesn't exist in a vacuum. He is a person and an athlete, and his identity intersects with how he moves through the world and how people treat him in that world, then and now. And so, in order to understand what he means to his home country and how he feels about his home country and the country where his parents are from, Nigeria, you kind of have to contend with all these facets of his identity.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting because his identity gets tied to places, and places is its own. Each place, I should say, is its own character in your book. It obviously ends with, if we're going to give away chapter titles, it ends with home.
Right.
But the book, I describe this because I'm a history teacher and not a math teacher. The book's like 50%. It's 50% Milwaukee, 50% being an immigrant, and 50% about Giannis. I know the math's kind of funky there, but like it really is constantly about the inner workings of spaces, and like he's a person that embodies a lot of spaces.
Man, thank you for saying that. That's literally what I wanted people to think, because I think like there's a tendency to just not create context when we talk about athletes. We forget that they're human, and humans are treated differently in this world. And place is a character, and Giannis is treated differently depending on where he goes. And he has not just one foot in one country and one foot in another country, but many different countries wherever he goes. And it's important to note that he didn't just come to America. He came to one of the most segregated cities in America. He wasn't just in Sepolia at the time of an economic recession. He was there with a neo-Nazi far-right group named Golden Dawn that came to power. Like all of these things are so important to talk about because when we talk about his miraculous rise, yes, it is so miraculous that he made it to the NBA, given that he was barely scouted, started playing basketball late, played in a division nobody's ever heard of. But it's also miraculous because he was able to transcend all of these things without papers, without any help, without any, it's really the political side is almost, in my opinion, is a little bit more interesting than the basketball.
Well, and isn't that fascinating that like, obviously you've uncovered in the book, but like this is an entire world that I felt like was, like we talked about, just a void. It was just not discussed. So we talk about places. You seem to use place as a character very well, and it seems very much intentional. And I think that's kind of what you're just saying. He references home in the tweet for the free agency signing, right? He re-signs in Milwaukee. I'm coming home, or whatever the phrase was exactly. Had you written the title of your final chapter yet? Did you know home was that another serendipitous moment, or was that on purpose?
No, it came together because of that tweet. So the end of the book was like, oh, OMG, what do I do? It was this like thing that was just there. And I was like, oh, dang, I'm going to have to get there at some point. I don't know how, because, I got the book deal in March 2020. I did not know that Giannis was going to stay in Milwaukee or not. So I started really chronologically because I was like, I don't know how to end this book. I really don't. And when he did that tweet and he said, this is my home, it just all clicked for me. And I was like, we're going to call it home. Place as a character, all these things that you're talking about, which by the way, like, thank you for seeing that, because that's, I worked really hard to establish those themes so that people would make those connections. And the reason I loved that tweet so much is like, he didn't have to say that, it goes beyond like, I want to stay here and win a championship. Home is such a loaded word. And I think Giannis has been searching for this his whole life in some ways. I chronicle the evictions that he and his family had early on in the book, and always sort of moving, being transitory, not really having a place to call your own, your home. Then he makes enough money that he has a home, but he's back and forth between the US and Greece. And then he's contending with Nigeria and all these things that are important to him. He has many homes, right? And then Milwaukee becomes an actual home. And so I just think like searching for home, it's not just a physical place, it's a place of belonging. And I think his whole life he's been searching to belong.
Well, and he has this home in Milwaukee. He's got his family there with, obviously, when they play elsewhere, but they seem to all home base, it looks like,
Right.
in Milwaukee. He's got his own child now. I mean, it really is becoming his familial home. And I think it's interesting that if I'm looking at sports in 2020, there's a lot of obviously very historic moments from that year, weirdly. But the historic sports moment to me also involves the Milwaukee Bucks when they walk out in the bubble. I learned a lot about, I mean, obviously we'd seen some of the awful video of
Right.
incidents coming out of there, but I learned a lot about Milwaukee and the Bucks in the course of that as well. You touch on that a little bit in the book, but can you expand a little bit more, like the impact that has on a guy like Giannis? Like, this is not his homeland. He's not choosing to be in Milwaukee. Like, that he got drafted there. That's just where he's stuck, kind of.
Yeah, I knew that there were, racial tensions in Milwaukee, but there is in every state. So I didn't think like, oh, Milwaukee in particular, but yeah, and learning the stats about, how much Black tenants are evicted and the rates of violence, with police killing unarmed Black men and incarceration rates for Black men and Black women. And he's drafted to essentially an incredibly polarized, segregated place where people that look like him are subjugated and not treated well. And I think that was fascinating that he learned how race works in America through teammates like Karan Butler, John Henson, like teammates that were saying like, this is how it is in America, because he's coming from his own dynamic in Greece, which is different. And I think it was really interesting to watch Giannis be vocal in the Black Lives Matter protests, through the pandemic, because he has this kind of hesitance to talk about race throughout his career for obvious reasons, right? Like if a neo-Nazi group is calling you a chimpanzee on national television from your home country,
Right.
you barely escaped with papers, you're not necessarily going to speak out about a neo-Nazi criminal organization. It just makes sense, And so I just, it's been fascinating to watch him speak out more. And I think there's so much more room for him to have an even bigger platform.
Well, and it's interesting because certainly in the beginning of his career, when it's just him and his brother in the States, he's not going to be super vocal because he's got to get his family here, right? Like that could really set things back. I thought it was interesting, and you talked a lot about it in the book, that his emphasis on activism in America is because it's like, again, this is home, and now I have child has to live in America now, right?
Right. Yeah, and he said that in the protest. He was like, I want my kid to feel safe here walking these streets. I don't want my kid to live in fear. He's raising a Black child in America, and how different that is from Sepolia and the challenges he faced growing up versus the ones his son will face. Because it doesn't matter if you're the child of a superstar. It doesn't matter. They will just see you for your race, and that's unfortunately the way things work in America and Europe, elsewhere. So I just think Giannis is just really has so much potential to use his voice even more good. I think people really want to hear from him. I think there's just such a hunger to hear from him and learn more about what he thinks. And there's more. I think there's even more of an interest about who he is as a person than one of the greatest basketball players of all time.
Yeah, and it's weirdly something that makes him a lot more like his peers, because you see athletes being very active across sports, certainly in the NBA, that not people that are very shy about letting us know, like, hey, we need to do better as a state, country, planet, whatever, right?
Right.
One thing that I think does make him different from his colleagues is he has this constant, you mentioned the tears as a young player. You mentioned there's this humility throughout the book. He got a lot of flack throughout the playoffs for some of those very same things, right? The Kevin Durant is the best player on earth quote. The, I can't believe, I don't know what I would do without Chris Middleton. It was something to that effect, right? You're hearing those happen this summer. You're not surprised, right? That all makes sense. That all tracks.
That all tracks. And also, I thought they were really lovely things to say. I thought they were really positive. I think he's like such a good role model for like how for children and teens of how to uplift your teammates, respect them, talk about them, interact with them, how to have respect for your peers. I don't understand why we have this stupid mentality, clickbait mentality, where you can praise another player and that means that you somehow don't think you're as good. I'm sorry, whose reading comprehension skills are these? I thought it was a really lovely thing to say. And I same with Chris Middleton, like championships aren't won alone. I don't. Like you will hear MJ talking about Kerr. You will like it just makes no sense. Like I have no idea. I think sports media is broken in so many ways. It's corrupt from the TV influence, and we're just steering. It's really sad because I actually think the next day should have been a robust conversation about sportsmanship and teammates and how and the struggles Chris and him went together from winning 15 games till now. And did you ever have times where you wanted to be the alpha and he wanted to be? I mean, I just think there's so many other directions you could have taken it, but it of course it just went to this like stupid discourse.
No, and you're preaching the choir here. I mean, anyone who listens to the show, I gave Skip Bayless a detention last week. Like he is as big an offender.
Please. Yes.
But I just thought it was interesting, and because I'm obviously doing this in the reverse order that you did, right? You wrote the book and then saw that stuff happen. I saw this happen. I was like, oh, this is interesting. And then I read the book and I'm like, oh, that all makes sense. Right. Right. That all is just the same guy.
Right.
All right, so this book emphasizes, it's in the title, the rise, and it's full of victories and setbacks through struggle. You hint throughout the book at the struggle for a championship.
Right.
You don't know when you're writing this that it's come. I don't think. If you do, we got to talk and we got to go to Vegas. I don't know. I don't know how. So what you're writing in that direction before there's a title, and then the title happens, and then the book comes out. So aside from being perfectly a great gambler, what was the purpose of that? Why is the title the thing that you're writing towards?
Well, it's funny because my friends are like, are you a witch? Can you write about my favorite players so we can win the championship? I'm like, I don't think it works like that. But I just think there was so much originally the book was pegged to come out at this time because we thought he would be in free agency, and obviously it would be the biggest story of the summer. And there's a lot of context about the Bucks as a franchise and, how it started and how the generational player always seems to leave, right? We set up Kareem, we set up this history of, the Bucks leaving for Atlanta originally and all these sort of factors that happened before Giannis, decades of mediocrity. So I'm writing in this context of like, here's a struggling franchise that almost leaves the city. Giannis literally saves the Bucks from leaving Milwaukee, right? Like it was a very real possibility that they could have left like the Supersonics did. And that was literally in conversation for decades, especially when he got there. And so then the Bucks get really good when Giannis comes. And it's like this super momentum is building towards the end of the book. But of course, I think it just ends there because the Bucks aren't going to win, right? Like they never win. Like it's like you always you have hope, but you get disappointed, and then you keep hoping, and it's like the psychology of a Bucks fan, right? So I just thought, okay, they need this guy if they ever want to do this, and I wrote it like that. If they ever want to do this. Okay, so obviously I didn't think they were going to do this when the book was literally being printed, and of course, everyone's like, oh my God, it ends before that. But I still think it shows you how awesome it is now that they won, because now you know all the struggle that this franchise and this player went through to get to this point.
Yeah, and I think that, the epilogue of winning a title, I don't mean to make it, not every title's the same. They're not all homogenous, but there is something weird there, right? Where like, yeah, of course they won. Where the book without that, knowing that when you're writing it, I think it's interesting that that's the like, climax that you don't even intend on. It also, he's the championship and like he's the success. He stays. And I think that was fascinating. But the whirlwind that has come after is only because they win. I mean, not only because, but they win the title, right? Like your life has been weirdly also turned upside down by the city of Milwaukee winning a championship.
Yes. I have not really slept since the Bucks won a championship. It's a privilege. It thrust me into the spotlight. Of course, I'm proud of the book regardless. But of course, like it created such a buzz around the book, which I'm thankful for. But yeah, it's been so crazy. And of course, I never expected this. Like, as you know, there's so much of the book that talks about how the Bucks are going to Bucks and they're not going to. And so, it was thrilling to see it happen, not just for personal reasons, which of course I'm rooting for me. You got to root for yourself. But all the Bucks fans I interviewed in the book, they got to have their moment in the sun. So it's been chaotic, but it's been really, awesome. It's a privilege for sure.
Yeah, and it's wild that it all happened. I mean, they're a Kevin Durant shoe size here, or tweaked hammy
Right.
there, or what, like it all just worked out. It's wild.
But that's Giannis's story. There's all these improbable moments that just miraculously occur. Like, what if the Greek government never grants him citizenship? He doesn't go to the NBA. What if what if that guy Spiros never sees him playing tag and then he never goes to Feel Atléticos? Like, what if the Bucks, don't draft him? What if there's just a million what ifs, I just think it's just with my what if. I was just
I was say we're coming full circle on the
wow, I really got to take that out of my vocab. But wow, my friend, you should block me after this, Parker. But yes, I just think like, of course they won it in this miraculous, unfathomable way. His whole journey's like that. It's a series of events of sorry to be annoying, improbable things.
No, I mean, and it's intentionally named, right? It is improbable.
Right.
This is not the first serendipitous time you've written about athletes, though, right? Obviously, whenever you write about someone, you go very full on deep dive in. It's great stuff. We're going to link stuff all throughout the description and show notes for people who want to read more about and by Mirin. But you cover LaMelo in Lithuania. He's Rookie of the Year. Right, like that's kind of, as someone who has enjoyed reading you, that was kind of like the national, like, who's this Mirin Fader? And it's like, now he's Rookie of the Year, right? That worked out.
That worked out very nicely, I must say. Thanks, LaMelo.
You had Arike, you covered in 2018. Oh. Arike is now like WNBA All-Star Game MVP. I'm living in Dallas. It's great to watch. Right?
She's great. She's awesome.
You write about Liz Cambage around the time she breaks the scoring record.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Also Dallas at the time, where she's based. But obviously, as a Rockets guy, you write about Jayshawn Tate. Great story. He ends up making all rookie team. You can go back to like Devontae Adams, and like now his quarterback's MVP, and like there's all the stories about him, and like, well, does he stay, does he go, kind of stuff. I also noticed you wrote about Jalen Green back in 2018, which makes me think that he'll be the first guy in modern basketball to be the Finals MVP as a rookie, right? That's the Rockets thing. That's how this goes. I guess my thought is, my real question though is, aside from talking about how great Jalen Green is how are you picking athletes? Because you're finding stories that are about people that we're all going to want to know about, and you're way at the front of it.
Thank you for saying that, Parker. It's interesting that you would say that, because we just had a meeting with the Ringer today, and I was thinking, as I was sitting here in this meeting, I was like, God, it is like so hard to come up with ideas. I think because, I write these things like you just listed, it seems so easy, right? Like, just pick somebody that's successful. But a lot of the people I pick are actually not, like, they're successful, but they're not there yet. I like picking people that are like on the rise or have something interesting about them, and then they blow up. Like, I love that, because I love learning how they got there. Right? How did you get there, and where are you from? Like, those are my two things. And I think it's one of the most hardest parts about being a writer is picking the subjects. And because sometimes I'm interested in somebody and they don't want to talk, or, maybe they do want to talk and then the interview doesn't go well and then the story sucks. Like, I think there's just so many factors involved in making a good story. But as far as choosing these people, if you notice, there's always some piece of adversity that this athlete or this person has gone through. And I don't really like to write about people where everything has gone perfect. I really don't like the prodigy. I really don't like everything's peaches. I don't like that. I think it's boring. And I think I like to pick people whose journeys are circuitous, and I think that there's a lot of things that people can read it and see and get inspired by in the stories. I think these themes are universal. So it's more about like what they've gone through. And that requires a tremendous amount of pre-reporting before I even pitch it to my editors.
Do you think there is some correlation between people that survive all of that really hard real life stuff and then sports ends up being kind of like, oh, I'm really good at this?
I think so. I think that's why, like, for example, with Giannis, the counting at the free throw line doesn't really faze him. I mean, how is that going to faze you when you've gone through literal hunger, you know? Somebody like Jalen Green, who's just battle tested and been through a lot, is not really going to feel fazed by celebrity at a young age. Somebody like Jayshawn Tate, who literally at every turn had everything against him. Nobody thought he was going to be good, and it created a tremendous confidence in himself. You know, it's not just like, I don't like presenting just what people have been through, but what they learn from it, what they take from it, how it makes them wiser, stronger, better, more empathetic, more compassionate, more competitive. I think it's fascinating to see how these life events have shaped them into the humans that they are.
Completely. And we all get to watch the fun part, right? Like, they've done all this before, or not on camera, at least, if not before. And now we're watching them play a game and cheering or booing or whatever. I hope we're not doing anything too much worse than booing. But it's just fascinating that you're shaking your head. Yeah. Somebody a little worse.
Right. You're right. It's funny, when I watch a game, I'm like dead ass silent, and my friends are like, is she mad? Is she having a bad day? But I'm studying them. I'm looking at the players, and I'm like, I wonder like what his background is. I'm like very curious. I'm very like student of the game. I don't really cheer. I don't really boo. I'm like, I look like I'm having the worst time in the world, but I'm actually having such an awesome time.
I'm actually a really bad Super Bowl party guest for the same reason. So like, I watch the game and talk during the commercials.
Right.
And I famously, for like 10 or so years now, have not been around people with Super Bowl, because I also want to watch the commercial Super Bowl. So that means I'm not talking for 4 hours, right? Like, like that's just how that goes.
You got to watch a game with just be two people in silence.
Just
you only
quiet,
just
like,
you hear the crunch of the tips. That's it.
For sure. Yeah, that'd be funny. The other thing I noticed about all of these athletes is there's a consistent international focus. Obviously, Giannis, Jayshawn plays in Australia, LaMelo, Lithuania, Cambeige is Australian. I could go down more. Is that intentional, or is that just where you're seeing more intrigue because it's different?
Yeah, intentional. I think like we're not exploring international stories in the way that we should. It's an untapped market. Clearly, sports leagues are trying to be global, and it's surprised me that sports media companies haven't explored more of that. I think they're starting to, for sure. You see some offices, like I know The Athletic has an office in the UK, I think, and I know Bleacher has one in the UK, but really it's like you're trying to separate yourself as a writer. Like, you're competing, there's so few of us left. You're really competing with people, and if everyone's going for the same people in America, here's how I can differentiate myself. Talk about people not from here. And I also just find it more interesting. There's social political context that goes with that. And I really love traveling. Pre-pandemic, I really was not a traveler before I became a journalist. It really pulled me out of my comfort zone. But once I saw that I was capable and could go to somewhere like Lithuania and report, it's just encouraged me to try to find other international stories, because people, I've gotten so many messages from people around the world, like, how do I buy your book? And I'm not saying that in like oh my God, people want to buy my book. It just reminds me, like, sports fans are just everywhere. Like, it's the one thing that so many people love. And it just reminds me that, like, there's so many stories out there, and I gotta go beyond my backyard.
So with the success of the athletes you write about, the two next people you need to write about are Alperen Sengun and Usman Garuba, both just drafted by the Rockets, both not from the States. Clearly, that's the direction we're going to go. And then we'll win a bunch of championships with all these Mirin Fader type of athletes. That's the direction. That's where we're going. Not that you need any plugging. People know who you are, but where can people find when you write these profiles on Green and Sengun and Garuba and so on for the Rockets? Where can people find your stuff?
You know what I'm about to do after this? I'm gonna Google and I'm gonna see if I really should. So thank you. I'm just at Mirin Fader on Twitter, MirinFader. And my website is just mirinfader.com. I worked so damn hard on my website. It is very hard to do that when you're just not, I'm not a tech person. So if you want to,
you have so much spare time, right? You have so much spare time.
Oh my God. Before the book came out, I was like, shit, I need to like update my website, and like, it's been years. Like, I've got to get it together. And so the night before my book came out, I was doing website because I was like, I think people are gonna actually maybe they'll click on it. And so yes, updated guys, it's updated.
So MirinFader.com, Mirin Fader on Twitter. Latest stuff's with the Ringer mostly. Obviously, the book will be linked. Well, we're gonna link it on Amazon in the show notes, but go to your local bookstore, right? Go somewhere else and find it there as well. But that is New York Times best-selling author Mirin Fader. Thank you for coming by.
They can't see my face. My eyes are just going huge. I'm shocked. Anyways, thank you, Parker. What an honor. I appreciate your time.
Okay, Parker, so the thesis statement for this commercial is James Harden has the best beard in sports. What do you think about that thesis statement?
Oh, I give it an A. You know, as a Houston guy, we seem to have an affinity for our beards between guys like him, Dallas Keuchel, lots of big beards in the Houston area. What do you think about the thesis?
So I'm a Jets fan, and I absolutely love the beard that Ryan Fitzpatrick has. So maybe I would give Ryan Fitzpatrick the nod over James Harden. But you're talking to a couple of bearded teachers, and we know a thing or two about making sure that you maintain that mane. So check out the Beard Struggle. The Beard Struggle, they make oils, they make balms, they even have this heated comb to make sure that you get your beard straight so that you're looking fresh.
I know I've really enjoyed using the oil they make for my quarantine beard of sorts. It's nice and long these days, but it helps keep it nice and healthy and hydrated. And if you're listening to our show, you can use FN Sports 15 and get 15% off your oils, your balms, or shampoos, conditioners, whatever you need to use to keep your beard looking healthy.
Absolutely. Check out the Beard Struggle at thebeardstruggle.com. Whether you're just starting to grow or you have a luscious mane already, the Beard Struggle's got all the products that you need. The Beard Struggle. Feast your face.
Class, don't you feel like you learned a little something about writing, or at least the detail and care it takes to write something as great as a New York Times best-selling biography? Shout out to friend of the show and really just friend Mirin for stopping by and talking some about her process, about the book itself, and maybe getting a little hint as to what's next and how she finds what athletes she wants to profile. Again, you can find all of her stuff, as she said, at MirinFader.com or on Twitter at Mirin Fader. That's at MirinFader or MirinFader.com for all the latest things from Mirin. As you'll see me post on my own Twitter, hashtag always read Mirin. All right, we hope you enjoyed the show. If you want to help us out, hit that subscribe button below. Find us on a couple of those audio outlets and do the same. Be sure to catch us on social media. Our Twitter handle is at FNSports2, and on Instagram we're at F_in_sports. Through both those, you'll be able to find our sponsors like Yeti Coolers and MyBookie, as well as a link to our merch store where you can let everyone know you are not one to be flunked with. We have a number of items, including a monthly Charitable Cause shirt, so be sure to check all of that out via our social media handles. Again, on Twitter at FNSports2, FINSPORTS 2, and on Instagram at F_in_sports. Like, subscribe, follow, rate, review, do all the wonderful things to help with the podcast, and whatever you do, just remember, don't flunk with us. Later, guys.